Up next on C-SPAN, we bring you the remarks of author Gore Vidal, speaking before the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee.
First of all, I want to welcome everybody here today. We have, for this lunch, a little over 1,000 people sitting down to eat. A little bit less than we had last night, but it's a wonderful, wonderful crowd, first of all. Secondly, I think it's been a great convention. There's a great warm feeling with everybody here. There has been all weekend, with one exception. That was when the guy from the State Department came and told us what the party line was going to be. I never heard so many complaints in my life in a half-hour time period as I did when he appeared. Secondly, I want to welcome all of the FBI informers in the audience. And the people who take notes for the Israeli lobby, you're welcome as well. And in fact, we'd like to, we don't have an award, but we'd like you all to stand up, if you would, please. And we're even blessed today with a representative from the New Republic, which is in recent years been one of the in-house organs for the Israeli lobby, and they're welcome as well. I also wanted to tell you that we invited all of the presidential candidates to appear at our convention in both parties. And as you can see, not one of them accepted. And I think we're doubly blessed for that, probably. I happened to be in the ADC office during this past week, and someone said, Jim, Gary Hart's office is on the line. He was the last one to turn us down. So I got on the line. This fellow said, Senator Aberesk, he said, this is Gary Hart's scheduling secretary, but it sounded very much like Gary Hart himself. And I knew he was short on money and short on staff, but I mean, that was ridiculous. Anyhow, he regretted. Then 2 days later, I think he withdrew from the race, which probably would have permitted him to come to our convention, you know, if he'd have just thought about it. I want to make an announcement. There's going to be a conference, a symposium on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. If you want to write this down, it's here in Washington at Georgetown University, May 2nd, 1988, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. George Ball will be the keynote speaker, and there will be a number of panels at the auditorium at the Intercultural Center at Georgetown University, sponsored by AAUG. Samia Farsoon asked me to make this announcement. So if you, I have the announcement up here if you want to take this down later on, but you're encouraged to attend. It's my pleasure to introduce, who's sitting down here in the audience, Congressman Jim Bates. Where is Jim? From San Diego. I also want to introduce the head table. Let's, you know, we're known for our efficiency here, so let's not do these long, ragged applause things. Let's do the ADC clap, as you call it, you know. It's the one time only. Let's rehearse it a minute here. Everybody on three. On three. 1, 2, 3. Not ragged, huh? Try it one more time on 3. 1, 2, 3, clap. Good. Okay. All right, starting on this end of the table, the ADC chapter coordinator in Montreal, Canada, Hatem Saab. The president of the Economic Division of the Consultation and Research Institute in Beirut, Lebanon, Kamal Hamdan. Out of sight. A medical doctor from Washington, D.C., a member of our ADC Executive Committee, Dr. Safa Rifka. Another medical doctor, they're the only people who can afford to come to these conventions, you know. Is president of our ADC Los Angeles chapter, and by the way, an international chess master who's what's your rating, Tony? 25, 40? Is it 25, 40? 24-20. It was 25-40 last time. In any event, Tony Sadie, the president of ADC, a man who's done a wonderful job with some exceptions. A former attorney from Detroit, Michigan, now residing in Washington, Abdeen Jabbar. Stand up, stand up. I'm going to tell Abdeen right after the meeting. On the extreme left, the president of our ADC chapter in Cincinnati, Ohio. Remember, efficiency. Muther Al-Ubaidi. The organizer, a woman who has just organized a brand new ADC chapter in Vermont, Sister Miriam Ward. And the ADC chapter coordinator in Hartford, Connecticut, Kevin Saba. And our speaker today, which I'll introduce, Gore Vidal. Gore Vidal has told me that he's going to make some short, brief remarks, and he would like to take questions from the audience. So while he's talking on the couple of three subjects that he's on, try to think of something to ask him. And please don't make speeches, just ask questions. Gore Vidal is perhaps one of America's greatest writers. And in his particular field nowadays, in the writing of historical novels, I believe that he's without equal anywhere. That particular kind of fiction is perhaps the most difficult to write, since not only must he use his creative imagination to create dialogue among the characters of his novel, but he needs to accomplish meticulous research on the historical backdrop for the characters that inhabit those books. For years, I've read his works. Some of them are, 1876, Burr, Lincoln, and his latest work, Empire, as well as Myra Breckinridge, Julian, Creation, Kalki and the City and the Pillar, where he's consistently been on the bestseller list every time he writes one of these. Also, he has written a number of essays. He has a book of essays called An Evening with Richard Nixon, homage to Daniel Shea's collected essays from 1952 to 1972, Matters of Fact and Fiction, and The Second American Revolution, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism for the year 1982. And for Broadway, he wrote two prize-winning plays. One is A Visit to a Small Planet, and the other is The Best Man. He was a young screenwriter at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios in Hollywood, and he worked on a number of important films, ranging from Ben-Hur to Suddenly Last Summer, and to the one he authored solely was The Best Man. As though the outpouring of his literature is not difficult enough, Mr. Vidal has also been extremely active in American politics. He not only comments on the American political system, but he has participated in it. He ran for the U.S. House of Representatives from New York City it was a Republican stronghold, and he lost, but he ran 20,000 votes ahead of John F. Kennedy, who was running for president in that year, in 1960. And he ran for the Senate, U.S. Senate from California, and he lost in the Democratic primary, but there were 11 people in that field, and he came in second with close to 500,000 votes in that particular primary. Now, my own interest in Mr. Vidal's work is not just because his father was from South Dakota, or that his father served in FDR's cabinet. It's not because one of his grandfather was a U.S. senator from Oklahoma. What was his name? Gore. His name was Gore, yeah. His first name, I forgot his first name. Thomas Gore. He said the Senator Gore. My interest was particularly piqued in 1986 when The Nation magazine asked a number of American writers to comment on the state of America for their 120th anniversary issue. Now, for that issue, The Nation had also asked me to write a short letter extolling or giving the reasons why I like The Nation. So I did, and when the issue came in the mail, as I was looking through it trying to find my name in print, I ran across Gore Vidal's essay in that issue, and it was entitled "The Empire Lovers Strike Back." As it turned out, in the process of defining what he saw as the predicament in which America finds itself, he very deftly scraped the skin off of two of America's leading Zionists, Norman Podhoretz, whom he calls Poddy, and Norman's wife, or Poddy's wife, Midge Decter. By the way, Elliot Abrams is their son-in-law, just for your information. Now, just a couple of examples why no one should try to knife Mr. Vidal without first running away to another planet for protection. Let me just quote a few lines from that essay in 1986. He says, Poddy and his wife are the lunts of the right wing, the Israeli Fifth Column Division. Another quote is, Podhoretz is the editor of Commentary magazine, circulation 55,000 and falling, paid for by the American Jewish Committee. He is best known and loved for his autobiographical novel entitled Making It, in which he tells us he has made it because he has become editor of Commentary and he might one day be a guest at the White House. Another quote is, Poddy has moved to the far right of American politics in order to get treasury money for Israel, since pro-Israeli lobbyists must see to it that America's "the Russians are coming" squads are in place so that they can continue to frighten the American people into spending enormous sums for defense, which also means the support of Israel in its never-ending wars against just about everybody. To make sure that nearly a third of the federal budget goes to the Pentagon and Israel, it is necessary for the pro-Israeli lobbyists to make common cause with our lunatic right wing. One final quote. Responding to Midge Decter's statement that, and I quote, Mr. Vidal does not like his country, close quote, Gore said, "Of course I like my country. After all, I'm its current biographer. But now that we're really leveling with each other, I've got to tell you I don't much like your country, which is Israel." So please welcome Gore Vidal.
our president would say, well. I assume many of you saw that flaming building on the way here from the center of town. That was the Ronald Reagan Library burning down. I must tell you the tragic news that both books were destroyed. But the real tragedy, he had not yet finished coloring the second. He gets more wonderful. Did you see, a couple of days ago, he was at Notre Dame, and he thinks he played football there now. And they were doing something about Newt Rockne. And he was carried away with nostalgia, and he said, let's win this one for the Gippet. So anyway, Gipper has become Gippet, and Gidget goes to Washington. I have prepared about 6 pages, which I'll be obliged to read, but I will look up from time to time in order to give an air of spontaneity. Since I'm a compulsive history teacher, I'm going to tell you a bit about what I've been finding out, because it may be new to you, it was to me, on how we turned into a bankrupt garrison state and what the historical background was. And after that, we will chat back and forth. Now, every now and then, usually while shaving, I realize that I have lived through nearly 1/3 of the life of the American Republic. And that proves not how old I am, but how young the Republic is. On the other hand, the American Empire, which started officially in 1898 with our acquisition of the Philippines over the dead bodies of 100,000 or 200,000 Filipinos, came to a peak in the year 1945, while I myself was still a part of that army which had won us the political and economic mastery of 2 hemispheres. Now, if anyone had said to me back then, I was a 20-year-old soldier, the whole thing would be lost in my lifetime, I would have said it is not possible to lose so much so quickly without at least an atomic catastrophe. But lose it we have. Yet looking back with hindsight, I can now see that our ending was implicit in our beginning. When Japan surrendered, the United States was faced with a choice. Either disarm, as we had done in the past, and enjoy the prosperity that comes from releasing so much wealth and energy to the private sector. We could do that, or we could maintain ourselves on a full military basis, which would mean a tight control, not only over our allies and such conquered provinces as West Germany, Italy, and Japan, but total control over the economic, which is to say the political lives of the American people. As Charles E. Wilson, a businessman, politician of that period, said, as early as 1944, I quote, "Instead of looking to disarmament and unpreparedness as a safeguard against war, a thoroughly discredited doctrine, let us try the opposite, full preparedness according to a continuing plan." The accidental president of the moment, Harry Truman, bought this notion. Although Truman campaigned in 1948 as an heir of Roosevelt's New Deal, he had a continuing plan. But how to impose it? The Republican leadership did not like the state to be the master of the country's economic life, while of the Democrats, only a few geopoliticians like Dean Acheson found thrilling the prospect of a military state to be justified in the name of a holy war against something called communism in general and Russia in particular. The fact that the Soviet Union was no military or economic threat to us was immaterial. They must seem to be threatening, so that the continuing plan could be set in motion in order to create the national security state in which we have been living for the past 40 years. What is the national security state? Well, it began officially, but secretly, in January 1950. The National Security Council produced a blueprint for a new kind of country, unlike anything that the United States had ever known before. This document, known as NSC 68 for short, was declassified only in 1975, committed us and commits us to the following, at least at the beginning, initial programs. First, no negotiations ever with Russia. Doesn't that sound familiar? Second, develop the hydrogen bomb so that when the Russians finally develop an atomic bomb, we would still not have to deal with that enemy, without which no national security state would exist. After all, no military threat, no continuing military buildup. Third, a rapid buildup of conventional forces. Fourth, a large increase in taxes to pay for all this. Fifth, a mobilization of the entire American society to fight this terrible specter, hence General Electric spokesman Ronald Reagan and that wonderfully crazed Red Menace film that he did. Sixth, a strong alliance system directed by the United States, which became NATO. Seventh, to make the people of Russia our allies in this holy adventure, hence the justification of all sorts of secret services, in no way responsible to the Congress that funds them, and so in violation of the old Constitution. Needless to say, the blueprint, the continuing plan, was never openly discussed at the time. But one by one, the major political players of the two parties came around. The Republican Senator Vandenberg told Truman that if he really wanted all those weapons and all those taxes to pay for them, he'd better scare the hell out of the American people. Truman obliged, and so have all of his successors, except briefly Eisenhower, who in a belated fit of conscience at the end of his presidency warned us against the military-industrial complex that had by then established permanent control over all our lives. The cynicism of this coup d'etat was breathtaking. Officially, we were doing nothing but trying to preserve freedom for ourselves and our allies from a ruthless enemy forever on the march. Actually, the real enemy, if that is the right word, was us for allowing our rulers to hijack our country, to impose military conscription unheard of in peacetime, to overthrow governments that did not please them, and finally to keep all but the very rich docile and jittery by opposing, as I know from personal experiences, income taxes that used to go as high as 90%. That's quite an achievement in a country 40 years officially at peace. Now, any true discussion of the nature of the national security state is promptly greeted with a list of Stalin's crimes against his own people and those of the satellite countries we allowed him to keep before we locked him up in the Northern Hemisphere and threw away the key. Meanwhile, in Asia, Douglas MacArthur was gallantly trying to change the ancient Japanese empire into a New England town meeting-style country, blissfully unaware that Washington had other plans. It is doubtful if MacArthur ever got to the point of the fact that he was being called a socialist by Senator Noland and others. So when we date from January 1950, the strict government control of our economy and the gradual erosion of our liberties, so that this strange new state could control as much as possible everyone everywhere in the economic interest of what is never, to put it tactfully, a very large group. Fortunately, all bad things must end. Our huge indebtedness has made the maintenance of the empire a nightmare. And the day that Japan stops buying our treasury bonds, the troops and missiles are all coming home to a highly restless population, to overdue understatement. Now, it's been my fate, or perhaps function, to give warnings long before the politicians and press are sometimes able to absorb them. After all, most of them are in place to give a rosy view of the national security state, and they give good value for their salaries. Since I'm not paid, I can ruminate and share my findings. I'm here today because of what I have just said, particularly now, as Jim was quoting, in New York City at the Royal Theater on January 11th, 1986. I also passed on the news at that meeting. The American empire had officially died the previous year when we became, after 71 years, a debtor nation, and the money power had gone from New York to Tokyo. I was predictably attacked by the press that serves the national security state. I was also attacked by those simple Jesus Christers who have been taught all their lives to fear and loathe communism, whatever it is. And I was also attacked by the not-so-simple Israel lobby, which never ceases to demonize the Soviet Union in order to make sure that half the federal revenue goes to defense, out of which the state of Israel, the lobby's sole preoccupation, is financed. I was promptly attacked by that small group of Israel firsters who call themselves neoconservatives, Leon, that I hated my country, they said, because I had criticized that national security state in which, like a prison, we have all been obliged to live and go broke for 40 years. I responded to my critics with characteristic sweetness and turned the other fist, as is my wont. I said that as much as I hated what our rulers have done to our country, it was not us, the country, who were at fault. I then added, as Jim quoted, that while we're on the subject of our respective homelands, I'm not so keen about yours, Midge, which is Israel. Now, until that moment, it hadn't occurred to me that nobody had really challenged the lobby in so public a way. Congress and President and press are all more or less bought or otherwise intimidated by this self-described sexy lobby. While the sins and errors of Israel are openly debated in Israel itself, if you want to find out what's going on, read the Jerusalem Post, there has been only fearful silence and weird lies in bravery's home and freedom's land. Well, I tried to lance the boil. Naturally, I was called an anti-Semite. Usually there's always an adjective attached, generally frenzied or virulent. Now, at the risk of hurting even more feelings, I must tell you that I regard monotheism as the greatest disaster ever to befall the human race. I see no good in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. Good people, yes, but any religion based on a single, well, frenzied and virulent God is not as useful to the human race as, say, Confucianism, which is not a religion, but an ethical and educational system that has worked pretty well for 2,500 years. So you see, I am ecumenical in my dislike for the book. But like it or not, the book is there, and because of it, people die, and the world is in danger. Israel had the bad luck to be invented at a moment in history when the nation state was going out of style. Those two clumsy empires, the Soviet Union and the United States, are both coming unstuck. Only by force can the Soviets control their Armenians and Muslims and Mongols. And only by force can we try to control a whole series of escalating race wars here at home, as well as the brisk occupation of the southern tier of the United States by those Hispanics from whom we stole their land in 1847. The world, if we survive, will not be one of nations, but of international cartels, of computerized money hurtling between capitals, of countries making what contributions they can to a more or less homogeneous world economy. Simultaneously, armies and flags and centralized administrations will give way to a regionalism that is interdependent with everyone else on Earth. Is this possible? Well, Switzerland is a splendid, small-scale model of what the world could be. 4 languages, 4 races, 4 sets of superstitions about one another, all live most harmoniously in a small area where they make a fortune out of those of us who haven't learned that we are living in a post-national security world. The only other place that reminded me of Switzerland that had this kind of balance was Lebanon in 1960. When we finally stop giving money to Israel, the money that Japan has so reluctantly lent us, peace will have to be made. If a cantonal system is set up, some areas of that part of the world will be Orthodox Jewish, others Shiite Muslim, others secular Jewish and or Muslim and or Christian. In any event, the great Bronze Age realtor in the sky will finally have to accept that none of those desirable rental properties between the Nile and the Euphrates can ever again include in the lease a discrimination clause. So what shall we celebrate this joyous Sunday? The slow but highly visible collapse due to bankruptcy of the National Security Council's 68th state and its ramshackle empire. Once we Americans are free of this dangerous state and its imperial burden, we may not have heaven on earth, but we certainly will have lessened the current hell, and we might even get our country back.
There's a how many microphones do you have up for questions? Just the one? Okay, over here in the center of the microphones. Go ahead. Please ask a question.
I wonder whether you have addressed the possibility that why we, this United States nation under God, supposedly made up of majority Christians, have not clarified the difference between Judaism as a religion and the state of Israel as a political institution, and that maybe Christians then would stop through voting the pouring of millions of dollars to a political state that they feel aligned to because of religious commitment in terms of heritage of Judaism, and if that clarity might help us as U.S. citizens make a difference in stopping foreign aid to Israel.
Well, what you propose is, what you've done is a sensible analysis, but you've left out one thing. As we do not have political parties, and as half the electorate wisely never votes, my last presidential vote was 1964 for Lyndon Johnson, the peace candidate. No one's ever going to get me to vote for him again for that job. You were saying when you talk about the American people and their attitudes toward Judaism and Israel, they would have no way of expressing themselves even if they saw it all clearly, which they can't do because the press and television won't tell them. they are not that interested in it, and the politicians are following quite a different national security state. It isn't convenient. You always have to have an enemy. Take so much tax money and waste it. And we've had the good luck, or they've had the good luck, to have communism all these years. That's coming to an end. I don't know what they're going to hate next. It may be Nigeria, it may be Jesse Jackson, it may be Nicaragua, or just plain old AIDS. I don't know. They'll have something.
I want to thank you for that, but I'd like to say that the United Church of Christ, which is part of the denomination that I'm a part of, has a Middle Eastern office in New York City, and they have sent out alerts to their global advocates speaking out against what is going on. And I'm hoping that Christians who want to seek out the truth are going to align themselves with the Arab community in this country.
This is not a question for Mr. Vidal. This is a confession for Jim Abaris. You asked for Israeli informer. I confess I am one of them. I was sent by the Mossad to report on your convention. And I have message to take with me to Mr. Shamir. I'll tell him I attended this 8th annual meeting of the so-called ADC. And I will tell him, look, these youngsters on the West Bank, Gaza, and everywhere in the occupied land, then they are not alone. I have seen people over here in Washington all-heartedly behind them. They are supporting them in every way they can. Those people who broke their hand, they are in bed. As a doctor, I know they are going to heal in about, say, 6 weeks. But because of their determination, I feel they are going to heal in half of the time, and they will be back to you. They are already collecting stones next to their sick bed. You will be running out of place, Mr. Shamir, and you better let them have their land and freedom.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Thank you for your question.
What I'm going to tell.
Wait. We want to hear Mr. Gore Vidal, please. So if you have a question, ask it. If not,
thank you.
We agree with you, you know, so thank you.
Mr. Vidal, would you elaborate on media oligopoly in this country and how, in connection with that, with the people who own this country, that affects the potential for significant social change in the United States?
I don't. What precisely was the question about?
About media oligopoly in this country, mass media.
Well, the mass media reflects the people who indeed own the country, and it's kind of curious about our ruling class. They've been there since the beginning. They were better educated in the past. But 40 years of the Russians are coming, and then the Russians didn't come. They look silly. And when finally they hire the best cue card reader in the country to be the president, and he has to end up going to Moscow to keep the Walsh Commission off his back, I mean, this is a bankrupt system. That's why I'm getting a little edgy. That. In a way, I look forward to the Depression, which is going to be awful, but I'd rather have that than more of what we've been having, which could very well end with Langley, Virginia, setting up a committee. Hi, Langley. Everybody here from Langley, please stand. You can take over the country. It's a dicey time, and it's not the media, it's those behind it who own it.
Mr. Vidal, could you please address the issue of the Middle East and Arab Americans being the Achilles heel of American liberals? One case at point, perhaps, is the president's failed attempt to outlaw people who oppose him on his Central American policies in '85 failed. However, Congress helped him out this time, or even despite of the administration supposedly voted to banish PLO offices and all other institutions that would deal with the PLO in this country, as such threatening the freedom of speech.
You know, I was thinking about that today, that among the many outrageous things that have been done to our country in recent years Can you imagine, Kissinger was behind that in 1975, that no American official could talk to a Palestinian PLO. Now, we have something called the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which is freedom of assembly. Senators, no matter how vile, should be able to talk to anyone, no matter how virtuous. And that they've got away with this. And the PLO can't have an office here, but I thought we hated Russia more. We're supposed to. We've been taught to. I was taught to hate them worst of all. I was taught to hate China when we were containing them. Then Nixon goes to the wall. That's a great wall you have there, you know. And they keep misdirecting our hate so that we won't hate them.
Mr. Vidal, we'd like to have your next book be on the Palestinians.
Oh. What was that?
As a follow-up...
I need new enemies, you know. I mean, I've been looking around for some.
As a follow-up to that question, since you've been afforded considerably more than Andy Warhol's predicted 15 minutes of infamy, as the case may be, I would like to know why it is exactly that you have not addressed this in a topic of a historical novel.
Well, my theme is the United States. And I don't, one of the reasons the Russians always liked me was I was one of the few Americans who was not telling them how to reform their system, as I was too busy reforming ours. And they always felt that this continence of mine, you know, was admirable. The Middle East is something I don't begin to understand. I was a Zionist at the beginning, so it seemed like a good idea after Hitler, and paid no attention to it. It was the invasion of Lebanon that got to me. Plus the fact that the real battle going on when they start shrieking anti-Semite and so on, it's the battle between right and left, between the national security state people and the Pentagon, and those of us on the left, I think, well, I think I have two others, who speak out against the Pentagon, which means you're speaking out against Israeli militarism everywhere. Nothing personal. Anyway, I'm not an authority on that. I did write a book called Julian, which is about 4th century Christianity, which I thought I'd put a stop to, but I haven't.
Mr. Vidal, at the Penn Conference in New York a couple of years ago, you endorsed the concept of a tax revolt. Do you think the climate is ripe today for a movement that encourages American citizens to withhold that portion of their taxes that goes to support the State of Israel?
Well, I've always thought that that was the ultimate weapon, but you've got to organize it very carefully. That you have to know exactly what you're doing, and it has to be a sort of 1, 2, 3. If the Congress and the President does not do the following, or does the following, 30 million of us will not pay income tax. That puts them out of business, because they can't put 30 million in jail. They would like to, but there's not enough space. But it's very hard to organize. You just can't arbitrarily, as friends of mine would do, to take off so much for the Pentagon budget from their tax. They ended in jail, or they ended in endless litigation. And you get to know accountants better than you want to know them.
Are you coming out to California so we could bring out the whole city and state there to hear you speak?
Well,
I think you should go out to the whole country.
I gave myself to you in 82.
When are you, I'd like to know your itinerary so we can get out all the publicity.
This is a typical New Republic trick, you see.
And somebody suggested you should run for president, and I back that support. I'm your age, and I followed your career, and you're fantastic.
Thank you.
When Israel was founded, it was like a foster child to Britain. Then a while later, it was adopted by the United States. and now it's 40 years since that happened. Don't you think it's high time to let this child go on his own?
Well, particularly when the parents are bankrupt, yes.
What do you think will cause the American ruling class to change its policy toward Israel?
Well, I think the essential anti-Semitism of the ruling class of the United States will probably surface at some point when they find it's too expensive. It's been useful in the Holy War against communism, and Israel was simply part of that structure. That's going to go away, and I think they're going to see it's too expensive to maintain it. The United States is a very small country. There are 155 million Arabs. There are nearly 1 billion Muslims in the world. We can't afford to have so many enemies. And the Soviet Union is also a small country. The white race is a minority race. With many, many enemies. We've misbehaved very badly over the years. The power of this earth is now in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. It will be China. We are barely hanging on. And I proposed this in Moscow a year ago, February, and again last month, that sooner or later the Soviet Union and the United States are going to have to form an alliance in order to survive economically, the two klutzes of the Northern Hemisphere, in order to compete economically with Japan and China. After all, neither one of us can make an automobile anybody wants to drive, So I see that as the coming future, and our ruling classes perhaps contain.
Now, question about how could the people of the United States allow the Zionist Party and Israel to decide for the United States how they should and who they should sell AWACS to, and why the American people, other than Arab American, why are they on the periphery? Why they think that it's not their country?
Well, it's the damnedest thing I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen anyone. I mean, we don't let the IRA rush around, you know, raising money, which they used to do quite publicly. We shame them into moderate silence. No one else ever has. No one else has ever been as beautifully organized. I mean, that lobby is a superb piece of work. And when senators realize that they will be called anti-Semites if they, as poor Charles Percy learned and got himself defeated in Illinois, they respond to this kind of intimidation. That's the only reason. Why the press doesn't do a better job, I suppose the same reason. The press is venal. The journalists are paid for. They don't want to be unpaid for. So there comes a consensus which governs the country. I've never seen so many openly outrageous things done. I suppose that's why I exploded a couple of years ago, because you must realize in my heart of hearts, I'm not interested in the Middle East. But I am interested in justice, and I'm interested in the United States, and I'm interested in freeing us.
Your reference to monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are you criticizing the message itself, or are you implying that men, kings, crusaders have corrupted that message? I mean, I'm interested in that area.
Well, the message can be read in any way one wants, as has been demonstrated so often. I'd say my objection, seriously, to monotheism, because what is it? It means one God. You see, religions are reflections of organization of men on earth. They do not come before man. Man comes before the religion. Monotheism is saying it's a totalitarian religion. All authority is concentrated in one God. What does this mean on earth? One king, one pharaoh, one pope, one bishop. Power, authority, all questions are answered by the book, and only certain people can get through it. And then they impose their will. To me, it's totalitarian. Western Europe, from whose tradition I come from a Latin family, from the old Roman Empire. There was no such thing as the idea of a single God. Some people thought there was, some people thought there was not. But not until the 4th century in Constantine did it become a state religion. And if you didn't believe it, you were killed, or you were at least in grave trouble. You could choose between Stoicism, you could do Mithras for the army. I mean, there were many different cults. It never occurred to anybody there was just one. And only one group, one people, had the truth. What arrogance. The most successful part of the world for about 2,000 years was China, and that's Confucianism, and they do not have one God, and the Hindus do not have one God. I'm for pluralism, as simple as that. And after all, it was Confucius. One of his disciples came up to him once, and his real name is Master Kung, and they said, Master Kung, if you could sum up all of human wisdom in one phrase, what would it be? This is the 5th century before Christ. Confucius said it would be, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
The American general elections is done, is around the corner. And we are going to go to vote. My question is, after reviewing the Republican platform and the Democrat platform, I hardly see any difference. They are both pro-Israel. It's like a choice between the devil and the deep blue sea. Is there a third choice for us?
Well, I think the heroic choice is not to vote at all and join the 50% who are the real people of the country and stay away from the 50% who do vote. By the time anybody becomes presidential, he's hopeless. He's been bought so many times. Have you heard one of them say anything about cutting the defense budget? Greenspan comes out the other day and said, there are only 2 ways of solving the crisis we're in. At least he sees that. One is to raise taxes. The other is to cut entitlements. Now, they act as though this were a kindly government giving money to old ladies in nursing homes. He doesn't mention the big cancer in the middle, which is the defense budget, because you can't mention that. He doesn't mention the fact that entitlements are Social Security, which is not part of the revenue of the government. You've got to factor that out. You factor that out, you find that we're spending 70% on military. And there is no war. Now, this is the madness of it, but you're not going to get any politician except 4 years ago. Jesse Jackson was saying all the right things. Now there's a strange consensus look comes over his face when he gets up there. There's a terrible look of a man who is going to be president. And he's forgotten the defense budget.
I get the impression that I really appreciate your thorough analysis of the military-industrial complex and the relationship between the economic interest in this country and the political. But I have the feeling that your analysis is very deterministic. You are otherwise saying that there's really no hope for change in the system unless the system is almost forced to change itself by outside interests. And I get the very pessimistic message that ideologically, at least, and on a moral and principled level, we have really no choice. We don't have much to say because it's so entrenched, the system, that it will only change when history will change it, more or less. Am I right?
Yes.
Ah. Well, that's the worst message we can end the convention, and bad luck for everyone.
You can, things can be influenced, but you said the key phrase, to which I said, yes, when history changes. Moods change, superstitions vary, people go broke. I'm counting on a major depression to save the United States. It could also wreck us. I mean, who knows what will come out of it. No ruling class has ever voted itself out of office. It's one of the strangest phenomena of history. It's one of the few absolute laws. They're not going to end their system, the two parties, which is really one party, the ownership of the country, which sits quietly in a tuxedo and hires lawyers to go to the Senate for them. That is going to go on. Nothing can happen until there is a financial catastrophe or we lose a major war. Well, heaven. What? What? Well, it's a very funny thing. In the last week, I talked to both my old friend Philip Roth and to Norman Mailer. And Norman and I are friends now. And I said, you know, he and I are getting older, and Philip is trying not to. But I said, do you have any sense when you write now that we're writing for anybody? And Philip said, no, I don't. And he said, that is the general perception. First of all, this television has preempted us very nicely. And secondly, this is one of those curious moments in history where change is going to take place. So hold your convention. Who knows? You may be the change.
You're one of the foremost proponents of conscientious non-voting. And since, as you pointed out, 50% of the population doesn't vote, can you suggest any ways for the members of that 50% to make the point that their non-voting is not a result of apathy, indifference, or confusion, but a deliberate choice? Is there any way we can get on the ballot a choice of none of the above?
That's a good notion. That's a very good notion. I'd say one thing, those of us who will not vote and take part in this process, is to proselytize. I'm looking forward to the election when 70% don't vote for president. So that means only 20% vote for one and 20% vote for the other. Then he says, I have a mandate. That's when you can start laughing at them. It will come to that. It is worn out.
Okay, that's it. Okay. Well, you've already expressed your appreciation to Gore for the wonderful lecture, and I express mine as well. Thank you very much. I want to turn this over to Abdeen now, who's going to get you. We have to start moving toward the demonstration. But I just wanted to, in expressing my thanks to Mr. Vidal, he wanted to be a U.S. Senator. That's why he ran. And I've had mixed feelings about it. I was not all that happy in the Senate. And I thought, well, why wish that on Gore Vidal? But then as I listened to him speak, I think it would be a well-deserved punishment both for the U.S. Senate and the government itself to have him there. Thank you very much.
You've been watching an address by author Gore Vidal before the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. For more information, you may write to that organization at 4201 Connecticut Avenue, Northwest, Suite 500, Washington, D.C. 20008.
The C-SPAN update recaps the news through the words of C-SPAN call-in guests.